Hundreds of soldiers with the Israel Defense Forces launched the largest counterterrorism operation in a number of months in the West Bank. Now, to chat about this in more detail is our foreign affairs expert and host of the Foreign Desk, Lisa Daftari, who actually just returned from a mini vacation in Lake Louise here in Alberta. Lisa, welcome back to VCN.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your beautiful Canada with me. It was wonderful and majestic.
You got your Rocky Mountain fix, did you?
I did. I did. It was really gorgeous. And I'm so happy I had the opportunity to visit your beautiful country.
Awesome. Now, Lisa, let's circle back to that huge offensive by the IDF, which was allegedly in response to an attempted suicide bombing attack in Tel Aviv, along with a recent spike in Muslim extremist behavior.
Yeah, so this just points to yet another front in this war. What many people don't understand is that this didn't just sprout up since October 7th, that Israel has been dealing with terrorists coming from Gaza, coming from the West Bank. Many of your viewers refer to it as Judea and Samaria, and also coming from Yemen and Iraq and Syria and Lebanon, where Hezbollah is. These are all the places where the Islamic Republic, the regime inside Iran, has propped up proxies and terrorists and supported them and giving them weapons and really the will to kill themselves and kill others in the name of jihad. And this offensive now, this campaign really is overdue in many ways. When I talk to military leaders inside Israel, they talk about how, this was something that they had put off for a long time, but now it has gotten to a point where the jihadis, the terrorists, have doubled down on their agenda to launch bombs into Israel, to launch missiles, and also to carry out one-offs, whether it's car ramming, whether it's abductions, whether it's suicide bombings, whether it's knife attacks. We've seen all of the above in recent years, and of course, much more so since October 7th. So yet another front in this war. And again, I remind my viewers, my readers, wherever I have a chance on media, that when we see, the Israeli army rescue a hostage this past week. It was a Bedouin. He was a Muslim. He was an Arab, but he was an Israeli citizen, which goes to show there is no apartheid in Israel, A, and B, that this is truly a war of those who support terrorism and those who are victims to it, like this Bedouin Arab who was held by Hamas as captive for almost 1 year.
Now, according to Sky News Arabia, Lisa, senior Hamas officials are calling for the resumption of even more suicide bombings?
Right. So much for that ceasefire, right? Just a waste of time and optics for the West to believe that they're doing something. But as many of you know and have been following, many ceasefire attempts have been rejected by the terror organization. And now, again, they come out and say, we're not even interested in a ceasefire. We're only interested in renewing this call for jihad, where we want suicide bombers all around the world, Hal, not just in the Middle East, but around the world, to target the West. It's not, again, not a war of just the Palestinians against the Israelis. It's a war against jihadis and anybody who prescribes or, believes in a Western pro-freedom, pro-democracy type of lifestyle.
Foreign Minister Israel Katz, Lisa, says Israel should temporarily evacuate Palestinian residents from the West Bank to facilitate the destruction of terror infrastructure located in the region. That would be a pretty big, ambitious endeavor.
Yeah, it would be yet another endeavor, right, Hal? So we know that when they went into Gaza, there was an effort to evacuate, sometimes successfully and sometimes unsuccessfully, where Hamas, put these innocent people, whether they're students in a school, whether it's a hospital, whether it's people in a very densely populated neighborhood, put them in harm's way, where they were victims to this awful war. So we saw that in Gaza, we saw it in Rafah, and now it would be in the West Bank. So Israel is attempting to launch an even larger offensive here, because their feeling is, if we're going to put an end to terrorism, we have to root it out in every inch of this place. And if they're going into the West Bank, well, then they need to remove the people so that that death toll doesn't go up, and that they're able to really scour through and to identify not only the terrorists, but where they keep their weapons, where they have their tunnel systems, and where they operate from.
New research by U.S. cybersecurity firm Mandiant says a hacking group in Iran ran a fake professional recruiting business to lure national security officials across Iran, Lebanon, and Syria into a cyber espionage trap. Tell me more about that.
They get more and more sophisticated every day, Hal. This is an area in which the Iran regime, the Islamic Republic, has really doubled down its efforts in terms of cyber warfare. This is yet another basically phishing scam where they were trying to identify experts in the region. It makes perfect sense, right? Who are the experts? Those who are educating people, raising awareness, and they either, they're the leaders of opposition in many cases. And here in the West, we've seen many of these campaigns as well. This is something that I've given talks on many, many times. We're talking about the influence campaign by the Islamic Republic to enter into different spheres to exert their influence or to obtain information in terms of espionage. So we've seen it in universities across the West. I know it happens in Canada. It happened here in the United States. It happens in Europe, whether it's in science labs, whether it's in reconnaissance in terms of getting, military equipment and then copycatting that at home, selling it to the Russians, selling it to North Korea, giving it to Hamas, giving it to Hezbollah. And we see it in our government. We have had it here in the United States where people who work in the State Department, in the Pentagon, have security clearance, are actually sent over by the Islamic Republic to get information and to report it back to the mullahs in Tehran. So this is yet another wake-up call to the sophistication or the level of or the appetite to really exert that influence and to gather information from the West.
It turns out U.S. President Joe Biden did, in fact, give the green light to build the now infamous Gaza aid pier, despite warnings that the plan could severely misfire. Now, Lisa, the floating pier, built in May by the U.S. military, cost taxpayers around $230 million. Let me ask you, was it a good investment? Was the much-needed aid received by the Palestinian people?
It was not only a waste of money, it was a waste of time, and it gave false hope. And I'll tell you, one of them, we've talked about this before, Hal, but I'll say it again. The fact that we're in an election cycle here in the United States has been one of the most unfortunate things about this war in the Middle East, because we don't really see the truth. We don't have a real, a clear narrative about what's going on, because, the Biden administration and now Kamala Harris, who wants to obviously run as the Democrat nominee, are playing both sides. We hear this as they want to get votes in Michigan, so they have to pander to the pro-Palestinian talking points, and then of course losing a lot of Jewish donors and pro-Israel Christian donors and voters, and then pandering to this side. Look, there are truths in this war, and the fact that this pier would not have worked should have been really what comes out in this discussion, just like the ceasefire opportunities that were just waste of time when one side is not interested in a ceasefire. You know, the Middle East, terrorism, national security, these are nonpartisan issues. These are bipartisan issues where both sides should come together and say, how do we best approach this so that there could be security and stability in the Middle East for both the Palestinians and the Israelis? How could we approach this so that terrorism doesn't trickle into the West, into Canada, into the United States, and into Europe? How do we deal with this so that we could put an end to it and not just be pandering for votes? Can't wait for this election to be over, Hal.
Yeah, see how it'll all shake down. Lisa, a new law enacted by the Taliban in Afghanistan has been condemned by the United Nations and the European Union. It imposes even more restrictions on women, including that they cover and clothe their entire bodies, and bans their voices from being heard in public. Women's movement is also being restricted without a male relative.
Hal, are we surprised? No, this is exactly what people knew what would happen when we withdrew from Afghanistan 3 years ago and very, very abruptly allowed the Taliban to come into play there. We were promised that this is not the Taliban of the 90s, and guess what, Hal? They're even worse. This is, very unfortunate for all of the blood and treasure that the West invested in Afghanistan for 2 decades, to only leave it in worse hands, to not allow the women who are educated, the women who had semi-decent lives before the Taliban came in, now not able to go to school, not able to work, not able to even run basic errands, to go to the doctor and to go to the grocery store without a male chaperone. Look, these condemnations, just lip service, right? The United Nations, the European Union, what did they do, at the time when the Taliban came into office? They normalized this political Islam, and it turned into extremist Islam. And again, are we surprised that when we usher in this type of government and a terror organization, and we normalize relations with them and treat them like a normal sovereign nation, that this would not happen? It's unfortunate, and I do hope that the people of Afghanistan do find some way to break free, and to have really a chance at a free life.
And I doubt we'd see large demonstrations in Afghanistan because a lot of the women would fear for their lives.
Absolutely, and that's what we see across the board in the Middle East. Whether it's the Palestinians living under Gaza, I've interviewed many of them who live under Hamas and have really no chance at coming out; they'll be killed. Or the Iranians, we saw how bravely the Iranian women came out onto the streets, and the aftermath of the 22-year-old Masa Amini being killed for not wearing her hijab properly. They tried; they were brave, they were courageous. They didn't get that help that they needed from the West. I mean, the EU, the UN, where were they then? But it's very difficult because the people have a certain voice and they're not able to express that voice or communicate that voice. But then, this is what we're seeing: the Taliban, the Islamic Republic, Hamas, Hezbollah, all being able to march forward.
Very sad. Lisa, closer to home, the Biden-Harris administration is allegedly using loopholes to expand welfare benefits once again. Now, it apparently is to help low-income families pay for broadband internet service. Is this not a good thing, though?
Look, in many ways, the welfare programs we have here in the United States are wonderful things. What's happening right now is that we're in an election cycle, and that always brings out, different promises and different. Again, this is a loophole, right? This is something that is being promised to people. Who's going to pay for it? All these wonderful free things are just lovely, and we would all love to take care of those who don't have as much, or need, just some help to get to the next level. But there's also a bill in California, for example, Hal, that they want to give zero down payment and zero prepayment home loans to illegal migrants. And that is really causing so much chaos here in California because so many, average Americans can't afford even groceries right now with the state of the economy, and to be giving these kinds of freebies to the migrants who just arrived just seems unfair when Americans have been working for decades to really just survive. So I think it's more across the board that we have to look at the bigger picture and not just look at this as a political play. How can we help people, and as the saying goes, make them fishermen and not just give them the fish. We're in a very bad economy right now, and until the whoever's going to be president come January 2025 has to deal with the average American, how they get, how they can pay for gas, how they can pay for groceries, and then we'll talk about the freebies, like internet and free homes and things like that.
The election is just around the corner. You're absolutely right. What are the latest polls saying? Harris or Trump? Who's in the lead right now?
It's close, but what I'm seeing is this honeymoon phase for Kamala Harris is still continuing, and you're seeing a lot of media censorship. Meta CEO Zuckerberg came out and said that he is guilty of complying with that censorship, allowing the Biden administration to really exert its influence even in social media. Look, that's what we see when you turn on your television, when you're watching the news. You don't really hear about Donald Trump as much anymore. It's all Kamala, 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 and the message that they have is joy, happiness, hope. Very similar to what we saw with President Obama's campaign. Not so much policy, and the debate is coming up in a couple of weeks. I know that Kamala Harris's team will surely prepare her well for that, but until then, she hasn't really given any interviews. She will not speak off the cuff. She will not give, just a natural interview. The CNN interview she agreed to. She wants to bring a buddy. She will be bringing her vice presidential pick to sit with her. It's interesting. I don't know how this will turn out or how the average American perceives this, or whether they're looking at policy or if they're looking at this as more of an emotional decision. Do I want the orange guy who's a bad guy, or do I want this woman who represents, the media is telling me represents hope and joy? So we shall see. Obviously, the policies matter so much, or else we wouldn't be in the situation that we are. In the last 4 years, I think America has suffered so much across the board in many ways, but truly in terms of foreign policy, which you and I talk about a lot, it's quite important to look at policy going forward.
Looking forward to seeing that debate. Lots of fireworks ahead. Political reporter and host of the Foreign Desk, Lisa Daftari, thanks again for joining us from Los Angeles.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.